Why is it that expectations are a bad idea? In fact, I go a step further, and I perhaps should have been a bit more emotive in the language of the title. I think expectations are toxic, and I'm going to explain to you exactly what my interpretation of it is, hopefully give you a new way of looking at things that you'll find useful. So, what is this really about? This is about expectations versus seeking agreements with people. So just think about that for a second. Think of expectations and your understanding of what that word means. Then think of agreements and your understanding of what that word means. Then do me a further favour and think, in the last day, the last week, how many times have you sought an agreement with somebody versus how many times have you expected things of people? Now this is relevant if you're an owner of a business, if you're a member of staff, if you're a mum or dad. And to be honest, if you're a young person listening to this, there will be expectations of you and you will have had expectations of others. So I'm interested, just let yourself have a moment there to think, how many times have I sought an agreement? Now, I might be pleasantly surprised, and if you were sitting here in front of me, you might be able to give me loads of examples where you've sought agreements. And if so, hats off to you, because you're in the minority. The likelihood is, and this is okay, you have had expectations of more than one person in the last day or so. In fact, you'll probably be able to highlight a number of times where people have failed to meet those expectations. The next thing that I want you to consider is, how did it feel about having these expectations of people? I can imagine you can find examples of people failing to meet these expectations, and I imagine you'll be able to recall moments when people have met them. And now I want you to think about, how did that feel? So first of all, when somebody failed to meet your expectations, did anything positive come out of that? And on the occasions when people did meet your expectations, was it a very average feeling, or did you feel euphoria? I imagine you didn't. The likelihood is it was what it was. You expected that of somebody. So what more can I expect for them to do other than the things that they were asked? Or maybe you didn't even ask them, but they just did them because they knew what was expected of them. So now you can think about this in every walk of life. You can do this in your job, in your personal life, but go back home today or back to work after you've put this podcast down and just think of the number of times you've had expectations. Now I'm going to explain my interpretation of why expectations and agreements don't work. But remember, I'm not here to tell you anything. The whole aim of this podcast is to make you think differently about the subject that I'm talking about. It's my hope that through starting to seek agreements and understanding the true difference of those versus expectations, you will see a marked improvement in the relations you have with people at work and at home. So let me give you a real life example. I'm not going to mention who the company is, of course, but one of my clients really tried hard to explain to me that their staff don't need job descriptions. And I, at length, discussed and debated this with them. Now, their rationale was that everybody knows what they need to do. As you can imagine, I didn't entirely agree with this. In fact, I fundamentally disagree with that line of thinking. However, I am not here to tell anybody anything. So what we look to do is understand how that worked for the staff. And I asked him, have there ever been times when people haven't met your expectations? And his response was, yes, all the time. And I said, well, how does that make you feel? And he says, well, it makes me feel like they're, I don't want to swear. Makes me frustrated with my staff, makes me feel let down, makes me feel that they're not bought in. And I said, has it ever made you think that maybe they didn't really know what it was they needed to do? And he says, well, let me give you an example. Whoever gets in first needs to turn on a certain number of things. So we've got rooms and lights and computers and so forth that need to be turned on. I'm one of the first in, but I'm not always the first. And it drives me nuts that as the owner of the business, I have to come in and turn on the lights and turn on the computers and all the other bits and pieces. And I said, perhaps that's just what they expect of you. And he did. He genuinely stopped for a second and think, well, I never thought about that. The people have expectations of me as the owner. Well, I assume they just come here and do as they're told. I said, well, no, it doesn't work that way. It works both ways. So you might have expectations of your staff, but I can tell you every single one of them has an expectation of you, has an expectation of their colleagues, has an expectation, because that's the culture that you've set up. And with no job description, they've also got no absolute clarity of what is expected of them anyway. So they're second guessing even that. Whereas if you sat down with some jobs and role descriptions and involved them in the process and made it clear that their views mattered, you would be able to start seeking an agreement, first of all, as to what a job description should show for the roles they're in, but you'd also be able to talk about specific, seemingly silly little things about who turns on the lights, who buys the coffee, who does what. Now, the first time you do it, it's going to seem like it's quite a long and arduous process, but it really isn't. And the more you do it, it becomes habit, it becomes culture. We no longer have expectations, meaning we no longer lead ourselves into disappointment and frustration. We actually get pleasantly surprised when people go above and beyond. And what I'm saying to you is, have a think about agreements. What if you sought to agree things with people on every subject that goes on, and we just make sure they happen? This won't feel like such an arduous task, because in time it will become the way of things, and you'll realise that you don't want to argue with one another. You will find some common ground, you will find consensus, you will find a way to agree. Most of us live in a world of expectations, and if we just transferred that to agreements, we would find that life is a lot more straightforward. So remember, I'm not here to tell you anything. I hope this has helped change your thinking on the subject. And again, as always, I don't want you to do anything like subscribe to my podcast channel or visit my website. What I do want, though, is if you do try to apply some of this thinking and you have some outcomes, good or bad, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know how this has gone for you. In the next episode, episode 3, I'm going to explore why a large number of people think coaching doesn't work. I will address some common misconceptions surrounding coaching and help you understand why coaching might actually be for you.